G'day ladies and gents, and welcome back to War Thunder. Today I'd like to have a discussion about potentially not adding long-ranged heavy bombers to rank 6. Now, for those of you that do play jets, I wouldn't consider myself a jet pilot personally, but I have played in the days before, for example, the Tu-4, in the days before even Japanese tanks were a thing. But for those of you who remember those days, I specifically remember using the IL-28 to bomb ground targets and then run away back to my fighters when Hunters and Venoms and F2 Sabres and Banshees came in to try and kill me. I didn't do terribly well. I mean, I got a lot of ground kills, and I did have a lot of fun, and I was a massive noob at the time. But those days of jets remind me of the main reason why long-range heavy bombers don't have a place in what would be the most competitive place in the whole of War Thunder Air. Now, long-range heavy bombers in rank 4 tend to be either meat shields or spaceships. So they don't really have a purpose, although there are a couple of things that I might discuss in another video that could make them a little bit more useful. Anyway, heavy bombers. What do they tend to do to gameplay that makes me personally absolutely not want them and want them to be never introduced to rank 6? Now, for a long-range heavy bomber, they tend to be very slow. They tend to be armored. They tend to have turrets. And the turrets, especially of Cold War era long-range heavy bombers, tend to be quite vicious, quite ferocious. Some of them, for example, the Tu-4, as current in rank 4 at 8.0, which does see jets and which does face top-tier combat almost exclusively, tends to be a bit of a problem. Instead of climbing to face fighters, it seems that now a lot of fighters are climbing off, to face bombers. Whereas in the old meta, without the Tu-4, with the IL-28 and the B-57s and the Cannonbearer and the Arados even, you wouldn't have as much of an issue. Everyone would stick at altitude, but the best research points and the best silver lions were to be had on the ground vehicles, on the pillboxes, on the heavy tanks, on the medium tanks. Not so much the bases. Now, in the background, I should be putting a few games I've had in the G91. And personally, my preferred type of plane, as such, is a sort of multi-role strike fighter-ish type. I really, really love the ground attack role personally. But I also do love the ability to take on fighters. So planes like the G91, especially at the moment, now that I've sort of rediscovered it, are actually quite appealing to me. And I have been spending a fair bit of time with the G91, and I'm getting used to the rockets again. I'm taking out pillboxes and tanks and all that, and I'm having an absolute blast doing it. Now, the fact that I can actually take out multiple ground targets with the hydropods, and in fact, a 4-man squad of G91s can quite quickly win a game by tickets just by using those hydropods, comes to show that to do damage to ground targets, you don't really need long-range heavy bombers. In fact, you can do it with attackers. And in fact, you don't really need attackers, you just need multi-role fighters. Now, I don't suggest that they just add the fighters. I would like to see some of the dedicated attackers. But if it comes down to strict competitiveness, multi-role fighters would be almost ideal. Now, of course, you have the dedicated fighters, and then you have the dedicated attackers, which is fine. I would love to see them. More planes, the merrier. Except the ones that slow down gameplay, and the ones that are there just as a meat shield, just as a burden. I don't believe heavy bombers have a place in the meta. And even if they did, they would sit in space, fly in a straight line, press the spacebar, and then climb further to space in their B-52, in their Tu-95, in their whatever you want. Planes like this, which have defensive armament and which can camp at space. Don't get me wrong, the Il-28 and the B-57 could, but with the Tu-95 and with the B-52, the B-36, etc., they haven't got the speed to run away and to climb back towards their team after doing a quick pass from staying undetected. So, for example, with my Il-28 late game, I used to be able to rush around Mig Alley, turn left towards the clump of light tanks, drop a single 250 kilo bomb, and destroy 5 or 6 of them. And then I would go on to take out the pillboxes and win the match by tickets. Now, that is a very, very valid strategy when it comes to attackers, when it comes to bombers, and when it comes to multi-role fighters. You can indeed win the match by tickets, especially if there is someone who is playing passive up at 10,000 meters. I've had that happen a lot of times, and in fact, in the match that I will show you on screen, this happens in my G91, and that's how I win the match, just by tickets. Now, Cold War jets tend to be a little bit more multi-role. They tend to have these Hydra pods, or they tend to have pods of some sort of rocket with a large capacity of rockets. Take the French, for example. They have the Snebs, they have the T10-151s, which do only come in groups of 16, but they still have larger volumes of unguided rockets for ground attack. And I would say the French jets are amongst the most modern of the jets in War Thunder at the moment. You look at the Vautour. Actually, the Vautour is a really, really good example of an attack bomber. I would definitely call it something like an attack bomber, where it sort of combines the role of a bomber, the bomb load, the maybe 1 or 2 defensive gunners, like the Il-28 has, or potentially forward guns, or both, or something of that caliber, but not slow. Can definitely pick up some speed. It can definitely turn, and it can definitely use its energy to fight properly. And, for example, a lot of people take the Canberra Mark 6 and use it as a fighter. They ditch the bombs, and they can have that ability to use it as a fighter because it has the capabilities, whereas a B-29, Tu-4, B-36, B-52, and Tu-95 don't have that ability. Planes like the Arado B-2, which have neither forward armament nor rear guns, can still use the bombs to fight, and whilst it doesn't have everything, it can use its quirks, its good turn rate, its decent energy retention, its smaller profile, its good mid-end acceleration, and it can use them to work with its team to take out targets, to take out bases. It's not exactly a heavy bomber or a long-range heavy bomber, but it still fits the meta. Not only that, but you can use it in Tanks RB as well, which it seems from what the community has been saying tends to be the focus of what Gaijin wants. everyone seems to believe that Gaijin is sort of focusing on tanks. And let's assume that they are. The Tu95 has no place in tanks. It never will. It's just too fat, and it's just too heavy. Granted, it does go 1,000 kilometers per hour, but it will never be maneuverable enough to do a level bombing run accurate enough, or a dive bombing run accurate enough and agilely enough to make it worth taking out. Even if it does have PE-8 nukes, everyone seems to be able to destroy a PE-8, even with a tank, even with the top-mounted 50 cal. It's just not the meta. And if we had attackers instead, so for example, the Sea Vixen, the Su-25T Frogfoot, and a couple of others, I believe the attacker/attack bomber meta would be far, far more enjoyable for the players, and it would be far more effective for the meta of the match to exist and to thrive, rather than everyone having to climb up to space to deal with the Tu-4s before they bomb out the base, and then as the match drags on, look for the Tu-4 in space because you're stock and you don't have the rockets yet, or something like that. Tu-4 and B-29 also tend to make the meta very stale and very slow. Turns it into a bit of a bomber hunt rather than a high-speed dogfight, which is exactly the opposite of what you want at high tier. At high tier, everyone tends to be traveling either very, very fast or very, very vertical. Everyone tends to be playing their energy and playing their speed. Now, in the case of bombers, specifically the long-range heavy bombers, there is no ability to play the energy and to play the speed as the bomber or against the bomber. You literally just make a high-speed pass on the bomber and it's dead. Especially if you have guided missiles, which Gaijin is definitely testing without a doubt. And there are user missions to not quite prove it, but to demonstrate. Fly Daily, was it a year ago? Demonstrated one of these quite well. But you can see the point. The long-range heavy bombers are just too slow, too fat, too bulky to ever make a difference in the game. And even if they were to make any difference in the game, they're just so abusable and they're just so against the flow of a high-tier jet battle game that it's just not worth adding in the first place. Maybe as an event, maybe just as an event plane, but I would much rather see planes like the Frogfoot, the Sea Vixen, maybe the Intruder, the Corsair 2, and a couple of other dedicated attackers, maybe the Blackburn Buccaneer. These are some very interesting planes, and maybe we could get new mechanics for them, or, for example, a lot of them have guided bombs, or like radar-guided bombs, or something like that. And, for example, just as the SPAA have the sight, have the lead indicator from arcade, maybe tanks with planes with guided bombs could have the bombing reticule. And with the discussion about surface-to-air missiles being brought up by BVVD in his podcast, this opens up a whole new meta that long-range heavy bombers could only dream of adding to the game. And I believe that if we have this rather than long-range heavy bombers, I think we could add a whole new dimension to the game, and it would be very enjoyable for those who enjoy their fighters, for those who enjoy their multi-role, who enjoy their close air support, who enjoy their SPAA, and those who enjoy the ground attack role in RB and the bomber role in RB, where, just like before the Tu-4 was added, the IL-28s could go bomb their base, and then they would return to base with the cover of their fighters coming to assist them. And whilst it may be a bit of nostalgia talking, I'm still a firm believer in the what I like to call speed and energy meta of jets, where the meta isn't exactly altitude, but it is rather who keeps their speed and who keeps their energy. And how people play their planes to do so or to lose it at the appropriate time to kill an enemy or whatnot. And that's where I believe the skill of jets comes from, rather than going for altitude, bombing all the bases, and then camping in space for the whole time, or just playing a slow plane, pressing the spacebar, and printing silver lions. I would much rather that the player base uses a bit more skill to grind out, for example, kills in attackers or whatever, just AI kills from pillboxes or something like that. And I think that if you learn to use ordnance properly, you can probably use it against fighter planes, like Whip. You could all be like Whip. But on a serious note, though, if long-range heavy bombers do actually get added to rank 6, and there are no guided missiles to combat them, then there will be a serious problem. You will find a lot of bombers camping in space. You will find a lot of problems with the meta of rank 6. It won't flow fast. It won't be smooth. It won't be clean. And whilst there are still problems apart from long-range heavy bombers, there is spark latency. There are definitely other issues, perhaps RP gain, silver line gain, maybe BRs. That will just be one of the many more issues added to the pile. And as a jet community who is already quite small and quite exclusive by nature, I don't think that would be a move in the right direction. Otherwise, you may face some pretty crappy consequences, and you'll see with exactly what the Tu4 did to rank 5 is what the Tu95 and the B52 could potentially do to rank 6.